Ready to go? Okay. All right, so hello everyone, Dambash. I'm Shahrani, Outreach Coordinator for Zahra Institute, and I am very pleased to welcome you all today with us as we launch our online MA program in Critical Muslim Studies. And Zahra Institute is a Chicago-based nonprofit graduate institution. And we currently offer an online master's program in Kurdish Studies, a certificate in Kurdish Studies, and multiple levels of language instruction in Kurmanji and Sorani Kurdish. I'm going to pass the mic in a moment to Ibrahim Demir, our Executive Director, who will tell us more about the Critical Muslim Studies at Zahra Institute. But first, let me walk you through our program for today. So after Dr. Demir's brief introduction, we will welcome our keynote speaker, Mucahit Bilici, who will speak for about 40 minutes on post-Islamism and the flight from religion, Turkey's new secularization. The lecture will be followed by about 20 minutes of Q&A. And after that, we hope you will stay around to enjoy the reception that will be set up for you, and we can continue our conversation informally. As you may have noticed, we do have t-shirts for sale. I personally love the soft tee material and the colors, so do check them out and buy them. And there are also some nifty brochures describing our programs, so please feel free to pick them up and take them with you. And we're also collecting names and emails for our mailing list. If you'd like to be added, please feel free to let them know, and they will add it by the door. And with no further ado, let me welcome Ibrahim Demir. Oh.
Thank you. Get settled here. Thank you, Shahreena. Welcome all. I see I come from Florida, but it looks similar weather here, and I really like this beautiful day in Chicago. I'm very excited to have you here for the launch of our new MA program in Critical Muslim Studies. You may be wondering, why do we need such a program? And what is distinctive about it? As you know, there are quite a few Islamic studies programs in the United States. They tend to focus on the historical development of Islam, the key literature it produced, the way stations in its development as it spread across the globe. There are also scholars in other disciplines who study Muslims in regional contexts, Islam in Pakistan, say, Islam in Malaysia, or as a social movement or a political identity, the Murid movement in Senegal, and Nahda and Tunisian democracy. All valid approaches. But if Islamic studies speaks most cogently to insiders and the area studies paradigm observes Muslims with an outsider's eye, Critical Muslim Studies seeks to apply both a deeply informed, culturally savvy perspective and a measured appraisal. Critical Muslim Studies is an interdisciplinary field that transcends both the Islamic studies and area studies approaches. It takes Muslim life as its primary object. It approaches Islam and Muslims in the context of their lived experience. Rather than taking the key texts of Islam as binding prescriptions, it asks how Muslims make sense of them in the present moment. CMS, or Critical Muslim Studies, incorporates both the humanities and social sciences to make sense of Muslim experience in the contemporary world. Our program is a distinctive program because of its contemporary focus and global character. It brings together the experience of Muslim majorities and Muslim minorities. Critical Muslim Studies transcends the idea of Muslim diaspora. With its heartlands and peripheries. Instead, it approaches Muslim experience at a global scale. It is critical because it perceives critique not as a luxury, but as a necessity for both Muslim life and understanding of it. Additionally, as an institution that also specializes in Kurdish studies, Critical Muslim Studies at Zahra Institute gives voice to the missing Kurdish strand in Islamic studies. In this way, too, we offer a fresh perspective on Islam and Muslims. Critical Muslim Studies is offered as both an MA and a certificate program. It's possible to take individual classes if you are interested in enrolling in only one or pursuing a degree over a longer time frame. Now, I would like to introduce our speaker, Mucahit Bilici. Mucahit is an associate professor of sociology. He's associate professor of sociology at John Jay College and the graduate center of the City University of New York. He is also the academic director of Zahra Institute. His work has a double focus on Muslims in America and the Kurdish experience in Turkey. In English, he is the author of Finding Mecca in America, How Islam is Becoming an American Religion. His new book, co-authored with Samuel Heilman, is following similar paths, what American Jews and Muslims can learn from one another. In Turkish, he is the author of Hamal Kürt, Türk İslamı ve Kürt Sorunu. The title of today's lecture is Post-Islamism and the Flight from Religion, Turkey's New Secularization. Without any further ado, please welcome Mucahit Bilici.
Thank you, Ibrahim, and thank you for coming on this beautiful day. I hope my voice is working. I'm still recovering from a cold, slightly weird voice of mine today. Okay. Looked at from outside, Turkey or Turkey seems to be sliding towards further religiosity or even Islamism. The Justice and Development Party, AKP, led by Recep Tayyip Erdogan, has been solidly in power for 2 decades. Some even believe that we are on the brink of restoring the caliphate. Like seeing the restoration of caliphate happening any time. It all sounds alarming. And in some respects, this is not entirely wrong either. There are a lot of signs of kind of religiosity or Islam as part of public life in Turkish context. Turkey has made peace with its Muslim identity, and religious symbolism weighs heavily in its global public image and self-presentation. This is the view from the outside. The view from the inside, however, is quite different. There is a mass departure from religion. Atheism may be the fastest growing religion in Turkey these days. Previously religious individuals are becoming secular. And this is not a mere exodus from organized religion to the sort of generalized spirituality that we are used to see here in America. Frequently, it takes the form of militant atheism. God is dying among some Muslims, and unlike past times, this is not just an elite phenomenon. Certain intellectuals in the late Ottoman era and in the Republican period, a small westernized segment did loudly declare their exit from Islam. But this is something qualitatively different. Religious people today tend to avoid talking about this. For them, it's an unpleasant development, while others, like the old-time secularists, they may find it a cause for celebration, a sign of progress, and a vindication of their long-held ambition. But beyond both the denial of the religious folks as to what is going on and the ideological opportunism of the secularists at this turn of events, we need a more critical hermeneutical effort to understand the nature of this development. Why are so many people leaving Islam? What are their reasons and why now? I'm here today to share with you my observations and analysis as a person who is part of the discussions on this transformation in Turkey. You may call what I'm presenting here a critical approach to a Muslim phenomenon, setting aside the truth or falsity of the beliefs in question. While outsiders might be more familiar with television series like Ertuğrul Resurrection, probably many of you have heard, and picture Turkey in the grip of a nostalgia for a glorious Muslim empire. These days, the most popular television shows domestically, as it turns out, deal with the scandals, moral collapse, and cultural helplessness of religious jamaats and tariqas, that is, religious communities and Sufi groups. One series in particular typifies this phenomenon, Kızıl Goncalar. I know some folks here are watching that show. Repressed for a long time during the Kemalist era, such jamaats and tariqas are today no longer seen as poor or innocent followers of some weirdo sheikhs or irrational but idealistic path. Rather, in the eyes of many in Turkey today, they come across as evil, morally suspect, politically co-opted, and people utterly lacking piety they preach. They are seen as con artists, manipulators, political tools, sexual abusers, and so on. What happened? The title of my talk today has three terms: Post-Islamism, the flight from religion, and the new secularization. I will take them up in that order. So, what do I mean by post-Islamism? Post means after, and post-Islamism refers to a condition that comes after Islamism loses its steam, its mystery, and most importantly, its status as the not yet tested ideology. The early Muslim encounter with modernity took place in the context of either colonialism or political military rivalry with European powers and so on. Certain transitions and transformations of the modern age were perceived as having been imposed by the colonizers or their local collaborators. Because the need for modernization was felt in a context where Muslims felt they were being asked to sacrifice their religion or religiosity for the sake of progress or westernization, ordinary Muslims displayed an attitude of resistance and rejection. They sensed that Muslim dignity and Muslim cultural tradition were under attack, and even well-intended efforts towards modernization could look like outright surrender to European dominance. Think of the example of madrasas, for example. Provincial Muslims resisted modern schools for a long time. The late Ottoman era madrasa versus mektep tension is well known. Similarly, the Cumhuriyet era cultural bifurcation between the secularists and the religious was in part a story of this reluctance to accept cultural defeat. This human, all too human Muslim resistance to elite modernization efforts kept the traditional religious culture and theology unquestioned for many decades. This resistance is typically called Islamism. Islamism is a modern term for a modern movement, a result of a religion becoming an ideology. It started as a Muslim response to the rise of the modern world. It's an identity movement, and it represents Muslim pursuit of self-rule and claims to cultural authenticity. Although often perceived exclusively as a political movement, Islamism is not simply political. It strives to defend Muslim dignity against the encroachment of European powers and to revitalize Muslim civilization. Islamism's modernist character is evident in its critique of the tradition and its desire to prove the worth of Islam, that it has something new to offer to the world. Despite the noise made by those Kemalists who surrendered to European supremacy and accepted Muslim inferiority. People who held those beliefs were oppressed by the elite, who saw them as an obstacle to progress and westernization. In the Turkish context, it was Kemalism. As long as the religious folks were in opposition and subject to repression by their secular state, their relationship to their inherited religious tradition was entirely protective. There was no room for questioning. Islam was simply great, and any internal reservations could be suspended until the country would be restored to its true owners, the conservative religious masses. In early 2000s, Erdogan's AKP came to power and ultimately achieved this long-held and, one must add, legitimate dream. To keep a long story short, the AKP experiment in the practice of Islam and the liberation of the religious segment of Turkish society generated surprising outcomes. The religious people proved no better, and according to some, even worse than their secular compatriots. They were perceived as having succumbed to conspicuous consumption, moral inconsistencies, and venal self-interest. Almost nothing otherworldly remained. Both among the religious and outside the religious sector, people who had secretly harbored optimism about a politics run by religious people now seem deeply disappointed. That is to say, even when people were not themselves religious, they hoped that there is something good in the religious kind of view that might add something that the secular movements have failed to deliver. My next term is the flight from religion. So, 2 decades later, many now see a landscape approximately like this. The AKP's this-worldly materialism, deep corruption, and the failure of the religious communities, that is Jamaats, to offer anything with moral worth other than clientelism and service to the political authority. A tragic outcome from a religious point of view. A Pyrrhic victory. Political success of the religious conservative masses in Turkey brought about the spiritual defeat of the religion. One may frame this development in different ways. What is this? An overcoming of Islamism? A demystification of Islamist politics? A shift from theology of poverty to a theology of abundance? a shift from a culture of opposition and piety to a culture of power and privilege. The triumph of consumerism over ideology, the loss of innocence, the corruption of a religion by politics, the encounter of religious people with worldly pleasures, a transcendence of an outdated theology, a late enlightenment, a belated westernization. The list can go on, but there is a grain of truth in all of them. The takeaway was this: there is nothing special about Islam. The moral superiority of Islam had been lost. The internal collapse in believability of religious morality in Turkey led to the collapse of theological claims and beliefs. AKP's achievements in delivering worldly comfort, opportunities for formerly deprived groups, and a new global world characterized by the revolutionary technologies of social media all ushered in a new condition. Social media truly played a significant role in terms of dissemination of new ideas and kind of formerly unacceptable conversations across a wide range of populations. What is perhaps the most shocking aspect of the flight from religion is that it includes the children of those AKP elites themselves. The moral repugnance widely felt towards the party leads to both depletion of internal religiosity and radicalization of Kemalist-style secularists. An interesting phenomenon is the number of personal transitions people make from Islamism to Kemalism as a result of this confluence. A whole controversy recurs repeatedly around the question of what is true Islam. People ask, if this is not true Islam, then show me what is. What happened before to other ideologies, like communism, is happening now to Islamism when promise and practice turn out to be far from each other. In the case of religion, once people begin to question the practice of Islam by Muslims, who are no longer constrained by any oppression from outside, an entirely new state of affairs emerge. This questioning of Islamic activism and Islamist politics eventually leads to the questioning of Islam itself. There are steps of this process that take place both within religion and outside it. I will briefly mention some of them. Frequently, this whole shift in religious beliefs is framed as a change in the conception of religion. People typically will say it's from mythos to logos, meaning from stories, narratives of just blind belief to blind faith to kind of rational explanation, justification, and so on. The pressure for a more rational interpretation of Islam leads to the sprouting of various new trends. Quran-only movements that discard hadith for its cultural baggage and perceived irrationality is an example. There is also a more postmodern reaction, which is radical traditionalism, and it refuses the pressure of rationalization. But typically, what starts as a critique of traditional understanding of Islam leads to the questioning of hadith. Once hadith becomes suspect, it is soon historicized and dismissed in the name of loyalty to Quran. While some stay at the level of Quranism as a modality of Islam, others proceed to question the content and nature of the Quran itself. Once Islam is transcended as a traditional religion, seekers either stay with the idea of God, and that is popularly known as deism, or go for rejection of a deity altogether, atheism. Former Islamist religious public intellectuals, such as Düjane Cündioğlu, and politically oppositional scholars of religion whose critique of Islamist politics have turned into a criticism of Islam, as in the case of Mustafa Öztürk, who's a professor, academic scholar, scholar of theology, and others. They play a significant role in the normalization and naturalization of the departure from religion. There is certainly a generational tint to it too. Now, not all atheists are militant, but those who are radical typically end up becoming anti-religious polemicists. They fight with the religion they abandoned. Their religiosity continues, but in reverse. They reproduce whatever dogmatism they see in their past theistic selves within their new atheistic selves. My personal observation is that the new homegrown atheism among formerly religious Muslims in Turkey has some notable traits. It is characterized by a naive humanism. Okay, so a kind of Copernican revolution in religion. A violent anti-clericalism, a revolt against the clerical class, that is imam, sheikh, religious leaders, who are seen as hypocrites. A crude positivism, a simplistic appreciation of science as an alternative to religion in explaining the world. So science is very popular in terms of offering alternative explanations to religious explanations. And an embarrassing new appreciation for Orientalism, celebration of the West and Europe, and condemnation of the Middle East and the Muslim world for its backwardness and so on. All right, now my last segment on new secularization. The story I have been telling you about is not simply a story of reaction to AKP or failure of Islamism. It is also an outcome of the success of AKP and Islamism. AKP itself can be seen as a democratization of modernization. That is to say, modernization is spreading to a larger number of people. A second wave of modernization that brought about its own secularization. Turkish society today reflects all these mixed realities. There is an increasing self-reflexivity via television soap operas, drama series, and so on. You can see how secular and religious collide, and it's all being debated through the symbolism in TV shows, and the popular conversation is happening around those elements. The secular-religious divide is being redefined, debated. There is historicization of Islam. The kind of conventional understanding and narrative of Islam is being questioned with popular, amateurish kind of scientific approaches, so to say. People come up with texts and stories that challenge and reflect a new understanding. There is a kind of Enlightenment rationalism, a strong popular interest in philosophy. You can see also rationalization in politics. This might come to you as a surprise. People might think that those who are more rational in politics would be the secular Turks. The Republican Kemalist Party would be more rational in politics. The truth is, the party or the political leader who uses science, algorithms, polling, all kinds of surveys, scientific method in short, most efficiently and most intensely is Tayyip Erdogan. So the so-called Islamist party is the most scientific in its conduct of politics, while the so-called progressive Kemalist party is totally ideological, almost religious in its devotion to certain principles, and it has, hence, it has not been successful except for recent recognition of the need to change. So there is rationalization in religion, and that is critique of traditional Islam. And I would add to this list, there is a globalization of Muslim self-consciousness, Muslim knowledge of themselves is now in a comparative context, both internal diversification of Turkish society. We got Syrians, we got Afghans, Central Asian, Turks, and so on. So different practices, cultures that host Islam are more immediately visible to more people, and people can travel and so on and so forth. So the effects of global kind of intermingling and encounters creates a new sense of what it means to be Muslim, and so on. So even when it doesn't mean the death of God, collapse of trust in religion as an institution, unbelievability of religion in the face of practice, and enhanced comparative knowledge of alternative explanations all is altering the landscape of belief in Turkey. The identity anxiety that I mentioned at the beginning of my talk that helped religion stay protected is now lost. Lifting of the external threat has released new dynamics. Now, in conclusion, I would say there is a new secularization, the second wave of Turkish modernization. The first one was state-sponsored, coercive secularization driven by the elites. It was top-down and never fully digested. The second wave of secularization is new in that it is bottom-up and comes as it happens despite state ideology. Let me finish with this remark. There is a crisis of reinterpretation in religion, and it is especially visible at this moment in Turkey. While there is a significant exodus from organized religion and from traditional religious culture, many Muslims experience it with anguish. They yearn for a reinterpretation, a new interpretation, an interpretation that will accommodate their new reality. So I will stop here to allow for a good discussion in Q&A, and thank you all for your patience. Ahmet? Sure. Short but great question. Yeah. What is next? Next, I think traditional understanding of Islam won't survive the political crisis that has been brought about. And I felt like I'm mentioning AKP a lot. The point is not AKP, actually. It is the fact that Islam was an ideal that was, protected and above the kind of messiness of the real world, is put into work. And, whether politically it is put into work in the form of a political party or in the form of Jamaat as social work, or theologically in terms of beliefs, it is facing a crisis. Now, a lot of religious people would tend to avoid confronting this reality. And some outsiders might just celebrate that. But I think it deserves, as a problem, from a purely scholarly point of view, let alone, us being Muslim or not, it deserves a proper understanding. What is the next step? What is going on? How can we overcome this challenge? So clearly, there is a transition from a more mythological, I don't know, ancestral storytelling of religion to a more, I would say, rationalized understanding of religion. Of course, rationalization sometimes can mean deprivation of religion from all its emotional, rich spiritual aspects. So we are at an age, globally speaking, that is smarter than the Enlightenment moment when people said only reason can solve all the problems, no superstitious beliefs, no angels in life, and so on. We see certain people kind of seeking that Enlightenment moment, and their radicalism, their scientism, excessive belief in science is almost dangerous. To my taste, it's not only infantile, childish, but also it's dangerous. Usually such people end up being totalitarian. Soviet Union is one example, a late example, but earlier you can see, within the, after French Revolution and so on, we can see examples of that totalitarian tendency. So religions constantly undergo transformation and renewal, and this has to happen internally, organically. And I think the pressure is accumulating for that. It has to be legitimate. You can't impose on it from outside. That was the mistake Kemalists did. So, if ultimately new perspectives will emerge, people will gravitate towards certain ideas, then they will be enshrined as the true understandings of Islam and so on. So my personal opinion is that, Islam is, if it is search for truth and goodness, historically it is deployed, and it always reflects and will always reflect the limitations and the contributions of the age and time. So it's not independent of the people, and therefore you don't have to deny and entirely reject tradition as some people do in the name of some ideal perfect Islam. Yeah, that is Islam too. Taliban's Islam is Islam too, true, but it is not the only Islam. And so people who say that, that's not Islam, this is Islam, they're as dangerous as those who are kind of authoritarian in their understanding of Islam. That's why there's I'm amazed at the kind of similarity between the new atheism in Turkey and the kind of radical, I don't know, attitudes of some traditionalists when it comes to religion. They are kind of mirror imaging each other. So, yeah, from inside, new voices, new interpretations, I think, is necessary. Religious clerical class, so to say, whether it is officially Diyanet or it is ulama at a broader level, they need to recognize this fact. And so hopefully critical Muslim studies type of confident but intellectually critical and yet respectful and capable of understanding the phenomena both from within and from without. Such perspectives or perspectives within such frameworks will help the way out in some sense. We can, and I mean broad, at the broader sense. Yeah. Okay. Now suddenly there are a ton of people. Who is managing? I shouldn't manage. I don't want to be biased. Okay. Ibrahim, don't ask questions. Choose who is gonna speak.
Yeah, thank you. Do you think this change will improve the Turkish democracy or will create more division in respect to all the minorities that you mentioned? The Afghan neighbors or Pakistani neighbors as well, or Syrian business owners or Kurdish people that who owns capital in Western Turkey now?
Yeah. Yeah, it's certainly the change in religion, the undermining of religion triggers ethnic identity in Turkey, the definition of national identity. So there is a slide towards Turkish nationalism overall. It's a significant change in the landscape, and that has to do with those attacks against Syrian business owners and calls for border closing, certain things mirroring American experience, illegal immigrants and that kind of talk is becoming dominant. So it has those kind of effects. In Turkish society, religion and ethnicity are kind of, they go together in the definition of national identity. So it certainly is going to have ramifications, or it already does. Yeah, I think minorities will have to fight the fight for legitimacy and kind of finding a footing within the overall kind of economy of legitimacy.
So what role does national economy play in this move towards secularization?
You mean economy, like economy? You are asking on the basis of the fact that Turkish economy is bad right now, or is independent of them?
It's just that you mentioned about politics or about history,
Yeah.
but there was
Oh, about the economy. Yes, good. Yeah, I usually don't talk about economy. All right. You must be Marxist. Okay. So economy plays a role in the sense that I think whatever economic resources Turkey had, like many societies, the elite benefits from resources more than the larger masses. And so it was kind of mostly monopolized by the secular elite for a long time, especially the military elite. So AKP created its own class of elite and industrialists and so on. So it's a kind of nationalization of the capital. So in that sense, it's brutal towards certain groups that were considered, secularists or Kemalists or non-Turkish and so on. So we see a new class of people who have resources. I know this is not a popular opinion, but that's how I think. I think AKP brought economic abundance to Turkish society, especially in the first period of its rule, and that comfort puts people in a questioning mode. If you are desperate and poor, you usually don't question your religion or whatever thing, because you are busy. So boredom and religion and philosophy and art, this stuff are all possible only when you are liberated from the harsh occupation of livelihood, to some extent. Like, we know this fact because we say, I don't have time, So when you have time, you can get bored. So I think AKP's kind of economic policies spread wealth to new group of people, and that led to a comfort zone for their children, if not for them. So usually they don't change their beliefs, but their children are born into a different setting, and their religious understanding as Generation Z or whatnot, it's totally different, and it's more critical. And when they see the hypocrisy of their parents and the party in power with which they are associated, then they want to morally disinfect themselves and distance themselves. And so there is that dynamic of wealth actually causing this, or comfort. Yeah. I mean, it's a very corrupt political system. There is no doubt about it. Yeah. That's how much I know economy.
I'd like to
All right.
share my analysis, and you can correct me. Throughout the history, and especially in last, century, or I can say in 20th century, religion, like something only some people can practice it perfectly, and the others just follow them, and even though they don't want to follow, it is kind of like a munafikan, like you don't want, but you have to follow. And religion only was stories of some excellent examples, excellent people, and these are not human beings, kind of. And
Yeah.
they didn't do any mistake and anything. And after, I think, 1920s, right, with Kemalism, religious people were oppressed a lot, and they wanted to just stay in their comfort zone. They didn't want to go out. But with, especially after 2002, Erdogan, the religious people in Turkey, they started going into the life, really.
Yes. Yeah.
And especially youth now, they are in life, and they are experiencing many other things, and they want to make sense of it.
Yeah.
At home, they are being told something else, and outside is not working, or in mosque, what they are preaching is not really working outside.
Yeah.
So then this conflict, I think, as I understood from you, it's kind of led more deist and atheist people.
Yeah.
And I think my understanding is that I think I would like to ask this: is it because Islam became so political rather than something pure should be practiced by individuals in their daily lives?
Okay,
and
good question.
Religion is there to help them to solve the problem.
Yeah. Did Islam become too much politicized? Is that why? Sadly, I don't think so. I don't think that certainly politicization of Islam caused a lot of damage, but even if it wasn't politicized that much, for other reasons, it will be questioned again. Just go back to the time of Mehmed Akif, Bediüzzaman Said Nursi, Saidi Kurdi, or Mustafa Sabri Effendi, or other Muslim modernizers, first generation of thinkers. These people, they perceive there is a problem. At that time, Islam wasn't politicized, but Islam was lagging behind in terms of industry, science, and so on. So those things triggered debates about things, and people start to question. For example, they say, okay, we need to turn towards Quran. So Quranism started at that time in response to that problem. So if there wasn't AKP, if there wasn't politicization of Islam, there would be some other problem. The fact is that the traditional understanding of Islam is not sustainable in the modern age unless it negotiates its relationship. You can reclaim the tradition only after going through the modernization, rationalization. You can say, look, I know this is not rational, but I choose to do it because it makes me happy. You see, you offer that rational explanation that's not reason, but it's a matter of taste, subjective preference. Totally respectable. This is a modern attitude. That's, postmodern appropriation of tradition. Is how you can continue, but you cannot just continue like our grandfathers were. My father's religiosity, it's truth. It's not. He can't justify. He doesn't need to justify because for justification there has to be a distance. There has to be a space for otherness, alternative thing. So that's why we are becoming modern. Muslims are modernizing. As Muslims modernize, their understanding of Islam changes accordingly. That's the story. AKP, youth, everything else, social media, they can be, they accelerate the process, they play some key role, but in the absence of those individual forces, still the process, I think, would be happening.
I think just want to add, for example, going to Umrah became a very tradition among these groups.
Yes.
They started getting the wealth, and they are seemingly Islamist Muslims. But I think still Quran or Islam is so superficial as solving my problem. As going and deeply studying, and just Bediüzzaman Said Nursi didn't want to go to the madrasas, for example, because they were all spending all the time on memorizing and grammar, right?
Yes.
And it doesn't help you.
Yeah. Good example. Madrasa couldn't survive the way it was. It had to reconcile with modern knowledge and continue to be madrasa, but in a smarter way. So it's that kind of change. Ibrahim, go ahead. Ayub.
Thank you, John. You mentioned about the secularization process of the early republic.
I didn't say heterodox, did I?
I mean, like kind of, yeah, I'm just interpreting
I see, okay.
that, yeah. So kind of there is no longer people are interested in mainstream Sunni interpretation of the religion. Can we say that?
I see your question. Let me answer in this way. Both Kemalism and Islamism are attempt at modernization of Sunni Islam, basically. We can put it that way. I have written this in Turkish as well. It's kind of a weird claim to make because we think of them usually in opposition to each other, but both of them are responses to the need for modernization. And as such, Kemalism couldn't get rid of Islam. Religious people think that Kemalism wanted to get rid of Islam. But if you ask Kemalists, they say, no, we believe in God. So they want to keep it, but they want to dilute it and tame it in a way that's compatible with their understanding of modernity. So in that sense, of course, as you become popular, you move away. Maybe Mustafa Kemal had a narrower understanding. Maybe he even hated Islam. It's possible. It's up to historians to find out if that was the case or not. But once he's president, he does politics, deal with people. You got masses, reality, institutions of, Diyanet and so on. Then you become more populist. You make peace with the mainstream. Same thing happened with AKP or Islamism in general. As you become popular, you run the government, then you have to deal with tariqas, whom you also hated, but now you have to defend them against others. So I think dynamics of, an ideology or a political project becoming mainstream forces them to defend Sunni Islam. They won't call it Sunni Islam, they might call it Turkish identity. Turkish identity was more secular in the past, secular Turkey. Now it is more Muslim Turkish. So there are shifts in the tone, in the coloring of the national identity. And it has ramifications for other ethnic groups, like Kurds. What does it mean? Which one is more, workable from your point of view, and so on. All right. So, go ahead.
So, you mentioned about the young people reaction to religion because of the issues with the AKP movement and their parents. They can see the hypocrisy. They don't act like they tell about religion. So, what about for Kurdish youth? Do you think they have different reactions than the rest of the population issue?
Yeah. Great question. What is Kurdish angle on this matter? So for Kurdish youth, the perspective is that, of course, Kurds are diverse. Some are part of AKP, some are secular, some are kind of away from both main Turkish trends and so on. But for Kurds don't own the state, therefore they don't have responsibility, so to say, of testing religion or whatever. They don't run Diyanet, therefore whatever Imam says that is stupid, it doesn't turn into a burden for Kurds to defend or to deal with. Kurds, because of weaponization of Islam against the Kurds are kind of a little more cautious, a little more reserved with respect to religious, Turkish kind of religious identity. And that reservation gives them some degree of criticalness that might be lacking in the Turkish Islam, so to say. So, Kurds on average are more critical of the official religion presented to them. They can do this in a secular way, or they can do it in a more religious way, because Kurds can claim a piety that is not tarnished by political abuse or by state power. Like, Kurdish, Mele in some village, doing his job properly, he is kind of independent of Diyanet or AKP and so on, if he's purely really local Kurdish person, say that. Now, the point is that, of course, to the extent Kurds get integrated or produce their collective religiosity in terms of, I don't know, institutions like madrasa or tariqas. Let's say if Menzil would not be known as a specifically Kurdish tariqa, and then it turns out they are kind of corrupt or problematic, then it would have similar ramifications. But we don't have such a situation because we don't have a distinctively Kurdish religious authority in a comparable manner. No.
My question, when I was first read the Samuel Huntington Philosophy of Civilization book, he was asking that question: is Turkey a real secular country? And he didn't find any answer for this one, because the Kemalists sometimes, as you mentioned, they say we are believing that we're following the rules. And the second one, when we look at the AKP, it's make emptiness of the religion in Turkey, because it's make all the kind of like the corruption covered under the shadow of the Islam.
Sure.
And then now when we look at the social media, the popular people in Turkey, most of them are not very qualified. And those people are highly getting recommended by the state. And those people bring too much question for youth, and especially the people who wants to make some research. That's the social media roles, how affecting young youth, the future, and for the Islam and secularism in Turkey.
People like Samuel Huntington, they saw Turkey as borderline countries. They expected kind of clash of civilizations to lead to kind of blood and so on. So it's a kind of old discussion. But in terms of social media, I think I would say that social media levels people, equalizes youth. It allowed new communities that couldn't be formed in the past, like online people who don't know each other from distances. Communities of interest, common interests. It brings people together. So it creates solidarity for unorthodox ideas, for different weird ideas. So you have other people like you. If you are alone, it will be harder even to claim it or to be proud about it. Now there are, you got a Facebook group if you're older. So social media facilitated a change in the landscape, and I think AKP's corruption created a general youth opposition to it. So generationally, it's really it's shifting. Thank you. Okay, let's get there. And food seems to be ready, so people,
Please, because you are before.
There are things in the pattern that you were describing that really recall for American Muslims what we've seen in the development of Christianity in America across the 20th century. So you have this kind of embattled, literalist, religious segment. You have people who are, good-hearted, generally spiritual, have left religion, like the nuns, as we call them. Pattern probably started a little bit earlier, and it seems to have progressed further, almost reaching an end point where you have this terrible religious landscape today that's driving our very contentious and unpleasant politics. At the same time, there wasn't colonialism. There weren't the kinds of pressures that you're describing in Turkey. I mean, I guess you should think that the Black Church has always been an important strand in Christianity, and certainly they were formed under those conditions of violence. But apart from that, it makes me wonder, is this pattern in the development of religion something more general, not about Islam and the constraints it saw in Turkey? Is this just the fate of religion? And second to that, are there lessons in what we see now in American Christianity that Muslims should take for a path to be avoided? The way things are going, is there a warning lesson there that something can be taken from?
I think, okay, so the first part of the question is the fact that maybe there is a shape to the history of religion over time that it transforms and takes different molds. I think so because of big processes like rationalization. Not to be reduced to Enlightenment stuff, but in terms of borrowing, I don't see that much necessary because it's already happening in the Turkish context. For example, tariqas increasingly realize their job is not so much, theology, but it is comforting people. It becomes more a kind of therapeutic type of legitimation, we are open to everyone. And maybe initially tariqas were like that actually. They were just repairing people, It was broken people going there, a sheikh, a guru helps them heal and feel better and so on. So, but the broader question is more interesting, and I think religion is growing with humanity. That's my opinion. So you can look at history of religion and you can say, different forms, you got monotheism, you got Islam and so on. And then you got Enlightenment, European moment, and now we have a global condition for religion now. Everyone knows what's going on everywhere, and is religion going to be totally transcended? Is it going to be discarded? I think not, but its name and form is going to be different and opened up to more, how to put it, a more democratized, not in the sense of popularization, but in terms of not being exclusive, culturally exclusive, sense of good and beautiful and compassionate and things like that. So, yeah, if that helps. Thank you. Nur Alim.
My question is very short.
You are the only one between these people and lunch. So.
Are we going to see like a more Protestant movement in Turkey? Like when we say Mustafa Öztürk,
Yeah.
plus İhsan Elyacek, we have now Cindoğlu.
Yeah.
It's kind of, are we going to see more like Protestant movement?
Yeah. So Protestantism was kind of religious rupture within Catholicism, and it's in part when commerce, tijaret, business, economy takes off, religion has to adjust to that too. So when the life itself changes, religion either adjusts to it or is torn apart. A new form of religion will be born. So rationalization and economization of life in Europe produced, one can say, Protestantism. So in Turkey, Protestantism is happening in the sense that, think of someone like Mustafa İslamoğlu, who was describing, Islam, yürek devleti, this, that, emotional stuff, and then he moved towards a rational justification, then critique of hadith, fighting them, and then he's now secular, but he hasn't declared himself secular. He's like universalist, good, it's a good position, but he can't give up his preacher position. So he wants to hold on to preacherhood. And, so these kind of people, some of them turn and they start to attack the preachers in general. But ultimately, we know that religion is an institution that has survived and will survive as it fulfills a need. And its content will be revised either by force or by consent. So I think sometimes events come and they tear things apart, break them apart, force them. But Protestantism within Islam is already, I think, in effect, it's happening. All right. Thank you.